good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome, and thank you for being here. As Hannah said, my name is Sebastián Trolli. I'm the Global Head of Industrial Automation and Software Research Program here at Frost Sullivan, and today I will be your moderator for this session titled The Augmented Connected Worker Growth Landscape in 2026, a deep dive into the technologies transforming the manufacturing frontline workforce. We're going to focus on a very important topic in the industry today that sits right at the intersection of labor pressure, operational performance, and industrial software strategy. Thank you again for joining us, and let's get into it. So, manufacturers today are dealing with a difficult mix of pressures, right? Labor shortages are not easing, experienced workers are retiring, new hires need to become productive faster, operations are getting more data rich, but not always more usable, right? And many organizations are still trying to connect frontline activity to the rest of the enterprise in a way that actually improves execution. At the same time, the Augmented Connected Worker, or ACW, as we call it, platforms are broadening their role. The market discussion is no longer only about digital work instructions. It now includes knowledge capture, skills management, operational excellence, worker productivity, integration with operational systems, AI-enabled support, and in some cases also a wider role across warehousing and workforce management. Today, I'm joined by an illustrious group of panelists. Please welcome Sandeep Ravandi, Jerry Dolinsky, Fred De Haro, and Francisco De Lera. Sandeep, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure, Sebastian, thank you. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandeep Ravande, founder and CEO of Innovaptive. A quick intro about our company. We focus on what we call internally an industrial execution layer that's helping manufacturers connect their systems, frontline workers, and assets to close the insight to action gap that actually plagues a lot of the manufacturing companies to drive measurable outcomes. So I'm excited to join Sebastian and the panelists here on this webinar, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. Look forward to the conversation. Jerry, would you mind?
Yes, thanks, Sebastian. Good day, everybody. Jerry Dolinsky, CEO of Dazuki. Dazuki is one of the platforms in the connected worker space. Primary focus is on the frontline worker in 4 different areas. One is to obtain and retain knowledge for those workers, standard operating procedures, using those same procedures to upskill, onboard, train employees, allowing those employees to both collaborate and work effectively in the line of work.
Thank you, Jerry. Fred, would you mind?
Yeah, hi, Sebastian. Hi, everybody. I'm Fred De Haro, CEO of Solvus. So at Solvus, we are building the intelligent operating system for manufacturing excellence. Today, our platform connects people across a number of factory sites worldwide. We don't just connect people, we connect processes and data into this one AI-powered system, driving measurable operational excellence for our customers, something important, as we know, because it's all about effectiveness, efficiencies, and productivity. So that's what we aim to do at Solvus.
Thank you very much, Fred. And last but not least, Francisco.
Hello, everyone. I'm Francisco De Lera. I'm a senior research analyst here at Frost Sullivan, working alongside Sebastian in the Industrial Automation and Software program. I am the lead analyst for all of our research concerning the Augmented Connected Worker market. And yeah, really looking forward to the discussion we're going to have today.
Thank you all very much for your participation. It's very valuable for not just for Frost & Sullivan, but also for the entire industrial community, right? So this is the agenda that we are discussing today. These are the overarching themes, right? We are covering 3 main themes today. We will start discussing challenges in the industrial landscape. Then we will move into the Augmented Connected Worker platform development, and we will be finishing the discussion with the ACW competitive landscape. So let's establish the business problem first around the manufacturing pain points and the challenges in the industrial landscape. So I have a first question for all of you, dear panelists, which is, How can ACW platforms help manufacturers address the most pressing challenges in the industrial landscape today? So for this first question, maybe Sandeep, would you like to start?
Yeah, absolutely, Sebastian. I think if you look at the manufacturing landscape across process industries, discrete or hybrid industries, there's a common pattern and thread. Of course, labor challenges, as you rightly pointed out, but then the margin pressures and the industrial productivity has been in a decline over the last 2 decades. Except in COVID, we saw a spike where there was extreme amount of capital expenditure that happened and quick decisions occurred, and we ran to doing a lot of automation and digitalization. So we saw a spike, but then from there on, we still see the decline happening. So if you step back, manufacturers have actually invested over the last 2 decades a lot of billions of dollars in ERP, APM systems, MES systems. You can talk about SCADA, DCS systems, a lot of analytics, a lot of dashboards, but the industrial productivity still continues to decline. So why? Why really is the industrial productivity still declining? Of course, there are macroeconomic pressures that we are all facing compared to the other products that our manufacturers are producing. And when you compare that with the like of China, obviously you got to compete on cost. But ultimately, I truly believe that we have a massive execution gap on the front line. And my panelists here, Fred and Jerry, obviously are doing things to improve skills, knowledge, and then operational excellence on the front line. I truly believe that will, significantly improve the industrial productivity. While what we do is complement some of these areas is to actually close the insight to entire frontline execution gap, from an operator to maintenance to stores to the safety, and closing the insight to action gap that eliminates the execution latency that typically causes downtime, impacts to throughput, OE, and also labor productivity issues. So the core problem, I could say, is in 4 points. Signal overload, too many insights, no clear prioritization. Number 2, execution latency, delays between detection and action closure. Third, a lot of fragmentation between operations, maintenance, safety, quality, and also your stores, as you pointed out earlier, which is in warehousing. So I believe the research work you guys are doing, you're uncovering that augmented connected worker platforms are evolving beyond digitizing work instructions, like you rightly pointed out. They're about closing the loop between insight and execution. So I believe that the major challenge is execution. Execution is the gap, and to close the execution gap, there's a variety of things that needs to be solved, and skills, knowledge, operational excellence, plus connecting all of the personas together on a unified platform is how we will overcome those challenges.
Yeah, you rightly pointed out, Sandeep, and I completely agree with your thoughts. Jerry, would you mind sharing your insights?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Sandeep. I think the only thing I would add on is from some of the pressures in there. I think the pressures differ a little bit from large enterprise to mid-market, right? A large enterprise is definitely where Sandeep is coming from, where, look, revenue solves all problems, but if revenue's not growing and you need to drive to the bottom line, you need to increase your operational efficiencies. And the challenge people are having underneath there, Sandeep has said, is broken systems, broken processes. And another one is a lot of domain knowledge and tribal knowledge leaving that factory floor, right? I think the mid-market side has a little different challenge, is that I'm seeing a lot of mid-market manufacturers that are growing rapidly. The challenge with them is the ability to attract and retain employees to support that growth. And all that leads into digitization and a focus on the frontline worker. And I get surprised every day from talking to 550 of our manufacturing customers and all new customers coming aboard. It's starting to be addressed, but it hasn't been addressed ever, right? Meaning that there's always been enough resources and I could throw bodies at problems, and that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Jerry, for those insights. And Fred, would you mind sharing your viewpoints on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything we've heard there from Sandeep and Jerry is absolutely spot on, and I agree. So Some cases you may say, well, there's been labor shortages that are real and that impacts factories, knowledge dissipating, leaving factories, etc. So, the digital transformation required is here, is now. And I would say the execution gap is absolutely real and there. And that's what Sandeep was mentioning. But, underneath all of those symptoms is a root cause, which is manufacturers have been making, let's say, critical operational decisions without the intelligence they need to make them well. And whilst the data exists and the framework exist, the people exist, but what's been missing is this layer that interconnects all of them in real time and enable them to make decisions based on context, events changing, etc. And it's at that moment in time that decisions turn connections, all of these elements that are connected into measurable performance improvements. And that's what I think the best ACW platforms do. It's about bringing all of that in a measured outcome for factories.
Yeah, absolutely right. 100% agree. Also, Fred, thank you for sharing your insights. And let's close with the Frost and Sullivan view here and Francisco's thoughts on this topic. How ACW platforms help manufacturers address their most pressing challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, as you can see from many of the previous responses, I think the main power from Augmented Connected Worker platforms come from how many diverse use cases they can address. How, we already covered like operational knowledge, training and upskilling, execution as well. And it can be used across, many different departments and use cases, maintenance, digitization, work execution, training. So I think really these platforms have the possibility of becoming an additional layer in the shop floor that can really help across the board in operations for manufacturers, and that's where the real power of these platforms comes from. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Fran, and thank you all for sharing your insights, right? And of course, those challenges are laying the foundation for everything we will discuss today. So the next piece is how the platforms themselves are evolving to meet those challenges, right? So let's talk about now what's new and what's next. So that brings us to the second section of today's discussion, which is ACW platform development. We have 3 questions here to discuss with this illustrious group of panelists today. So the first question in this section would be, how are the new capabilities expanding ACW platform scope? And we would like to start with Jerry on this one.
Sure, Sebastian. Look, I know we're going to talk about AI in a little bit, I hope. You can't have a conversation without talking about AI. But I think without going into the AI directly for a second, I think the enablement of connecting systems up and the power of that data is allowing us to enhance the feature functionality underneath ACW platforms. A couple examples underneath that, it's providing worker guidance in the point of work of how do I do that job? And I think there's big enhancements coming there. To take skills tracking from a static to more of a proactive approach to understand what's coming down the line, what's coming down from what do I need to produce, how are my skills, and do I have the skills to produce that, and getting ahead of the game with upskilling and making sure that the skills are there. I think a lot of it is changing the world of, in every manufacturing plant, they're fighting fires, right? And if you're always fighting fires, it's hard to be proactive. And I think taking the ACW platforms, allowing them to be proactive on their prioritization. And I think the biggest thing happened in there is this unification of people, process, and machine, and bringing those 3 things together. So instead of having the dashboard that says you have an issue, right? You're moving deeper down into it with, is this a people issue? Is it a broken process, or is this a machine issue? And bringing those 3 together. The old saying, people, process, and technology. I throw the machine underneath there as it relates to the manufacturer.
Fantastic, thank you, Jerry. And Fred, your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, look, Jerry's right. The scope has expanded significantly. A few years ago, I would say connected worker platforms were largely about digitizing procedures, right? So you collect data, you create these what we call knowledge-based systems, or the beginnings of your knowledge-based systems in a factory. You have all this data available, and then you want to turn that from data into intelligence. So as Jerry's saying, I'm sure we're going to talk about AI because that's where this leads to, right? But all of this digitization, I would say, and connecting all these frontline workers to back-end systems and so on was not and is not sufficient. So what we're seeing is really a fundamental shift. Platforms moving from being tools which just surface information to being systems that generate intelligence. And that, I think, is what we're seeing with the AI initiatives amongst all the manufacturing world. Now, the difference of all of this matters enormously in practice, because a tool gives you a procedure. An intelligence system tells you which procedure, why, what happened last time you used that manufacturing line, what was the outcome, etc. So you're starting to get a lot more intelligence, and also within the context, which is what we spoke about earlier. So it's about this capability expansion within connected worker platforms that actually moves the needle. And it only works if the platform is built to learn from every use, and I would say every intelligence built over time in the factory line.
Thank you, Fred. 100% agree with that. And Sandeep, your views on the expansion of the ACW platform scope?
Yeah, I think, Sebastian, it's a great question. And when you start thinking about from a customer and starting with the customer and what he's thinking about, the customer's lens is about how do I improve my profit and loss statement? How do I how do I become more operationally efficient? How do I save a lot more money? How do I improve my throughput? How do I improve my OEE? As you start thinking about that and start thinking about the different solutions we have in the market, the likes of an MES, APM, ERP, and then, of course, the Augmented Connected Worker, we got to start thinking about how can we deliver measurable, tangible value to our customers to map capabilities back to that. As an example, Innovaptive and Dozuki actually recently announced a partnership, and that was driven by actually a customer coming to us. Although Innovaptive does have a basic digital work instruction capability, we decided to partner with Dozuki because it's best in class with 550 customers where it's already deployed. And kind of bringing that work instruction capability embedded into the end-to-end workflow of the insight to execution is an example of expanded ACW capabilities. But I don't believe it's going to be one vendor wins all. It's actually how does the customer think about creating value by bringing the ecosystem together? Maybe it's Solvay plus Innovaptive plus Dozuki that actually creates an amazing impact for our end customer. So when you think about expanding capabilities, what we are seeing is a trend from moving away from point solutions into enterprise-wide execution platforms, where we will actually see ecosystems come together, just like Dozuki and Innovaptive now, plus others coming together to actually deliver outcomes, measurable outcomes within a certain time-bound goals that we have to achieve as a company. So a great example, I think we have shared with Frost and Sullivan, and you guys got a chance to connect with some of our customers as well. The biggest story we have is today a chemical manufacturing company like Indorama is seeing $50 million of margin improvement by actually thinking about execution systems, industrial execution systems. But as they're executing that work, we also recognize that skills and knowledge play an important part in increasing that margin expansion, right? So Jerry and I are talking to common customers to figure out how can we embed skills and knowledge into execution capability to widen that margin even further. So I believe to your question, how is the ACW platform scope expanding? It's expanding where we are connecting operations, maintenance, safety, inventory, embedding skills and knowledge into that, bringing a culture of operational excellence. This requires integrating data from MES, APM, historians into the workflows. And then AI, like Jerry said, we're going to talk a lot about it. We cannot have any conversation without AI. And AI is embedded everywhere into how you guide the frontline execution and decision, because you have a lot of newer workers coming. They need the skills, they need the knowledge, they need onboarding time, faster onboarding time, they need fewer mistakes, and they need to execute better work from the signals to execution. So I believe ACW is an ecosystem to drive measurable outcomes for our customers. And there is, each of our platforms actually bring tremendous strength that actually contributes to that margin expansion for our customers.
Thanks so much, Sandeep. And you mentioned a couple of concepts that we will be discussing later in the webinar, right? So appreciate that. Fran, would you mind sharing your thoughts on? Do you agree with what Jerry, Fred, and Sandeep said? Would you like to add something else?
Yeah, absolutely. As you know, we did this research back in 2024 and we have updated it. And back then we already saw how, these platforms were slowly like expanding in the shop floor. And I think with this new research we did, and only 1 year has passed, yet we saw like a lot of new capabilities, very interesting capabilities being developed, which continue to, extend the scope that these platforms can address. Off the top of my mind, for example, these platforms have growingly addressed warehousing issues, for example, and are more and more helping manufacturers with workforce development, with scheduling different tasks and jobs, So I think it's a really interesting space to look at for the next few years as these capabilities continue to develop, because we're seeing that growingly these platforms are of course covering the whole of the shop floor, but are also living and addressing other areas which can be of very high interest for manufacturers.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you all. Right, it was a great discussion around this topic, which is one of the growth trends that we are seeing in the market. And Fran has, deeply researched that as the lead analyst for the ACW research efforts here at Frost & Sullivan. And again, thank you for this sharing your great insights on this topic. And now continue talking about ACW platform development. And you mentioned this, Jerry, and also Sandeep. One capability that is expanding scope faster than most is AI, right? Artificial intelligence. So let's dive deeper into it and where it's actually moving the needle, right? So the question on this end, on this front, would be, this is a general type of question, but please feel free to be specific if you want, right? What AI-driven tools are having the biggest impact among manufacturers right now, and which are the most impacted outcomes, right? Maybe thinking of, I don't know, knowledge retrieval or workflow automation or reduced time to competency. So let's start with Sandeep first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think AI is one of the biggest accelerators, I believe, in this space to augment the frontline worker. But the key is where it's applied. So I believe there are 3 layers of AI when you start thinking of for the frontline execution. The number one is detection. Obviously, you can think about signals and insights coming from asset condition monitoring tools, process optimization tools, and as general asset performance management tools. But then at the front line as well, there is ways to detect easier and better with execution, right? So for an example, you have a HMI gauge and you have like about 20 readings on that. Why would you need to manually input those 20 readings? Why can't you take a picture and computer vision does the job to map all those 20 readings into a rounds execution, as an example, right? Or an inspection execution. In fact, we have launched that agent, and deployed in a couple of our customers. And the response from the end users is outstanding, right? Because the operator now does not feel that their job is a data collector. The operator feels that his day-to-day job is issue management and exception management to improve reliability and safety of the plant. So I think AI is tremendously augmenting that operator to move from spending time in compliance and data collection to certainly now focusing more on issue management and exception resolution. That's one. The second one is decisioning, right? So when you think of decisioning, these frontline workers are always faced with critical decisions that they need to make in order to execute an insight to close out that detection that happened either from a machine or from a human, right? So how do you prioritize that work? AI can tremendously help you in terms of risk prioritization, or plan a job out, automatically convert a detection into a work order or a work package using a knowledge graph, and guiding that worker to actually a more accurate work package with exactly the right set of information inside it, with work instructions embedded within that work order. That's powerful now, because if you have a young mechanic that is on the job trying to fix a machine, he not only has all the details of that work package, from an operations to components to permits to forms, but he's got the step-by-step visual work instructions, say from a Dazuki, right? So now what you've done is you've taken a younger worker and made him operate like a 40-year-old worker, and AI is augmenting the mean time to repair and also improving the mean time between failure, right? So AI is a powerhouse, and we have launched 15 AI agents on our platform from the perspective of how do we create tremendous value and expand margins for our customers by guiding the actions and ensuring closure at the front line. But again, I want to highlight, most companies are still trying to focus on detection, but I think this research you guys are doing is powerful for the audience, because detection alone does not create any value, actually. Detection along with execution is what creates value. And I think combining industrial AI, which is usually thought about, insights, how do you bring that industrial AI into execution with agentic workflows to augment the frontline, is transformative. I think there's so much operational inefficiencies that can be unlocked by doing so.
Great answer. Thank you, Sandy, for sharing your insights on this huge topic. Fred, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, totally agree with Sandeep, and especially the last point around agentic. So what you've seen typically in the industry is this first drive towards what I would call just an evolution of a co-pilot in AI. And so that answers some questions and answers for factories, but what is more powerful is when you start adding contextual data, that contextual layer that I keep referring to, which is what is relevant to that particular factory and how do they solve the particular problem. And so at Solvus, building this knowledge base around OPEX for the last 10 years, when we start doing an analysis of that data, you start looking and coming up with something like 34 AI-driven outcomes of benefits for factories. And so all of a sudden, what this tells your customer is that the data that you've been harvesting over those years, there's a lot of improvements. And so whilst the journey, as we said, starts with that digitization of processes, that harvesting of data, now you want to create that intelligence. And so the reality is we're still far away from agentic AI in manufacturing, but that is where it will come, and it will come very quickly, because you only need to see the advances of AI over the past 6 months, right? We've seen all of those improvements of use cases. When you start adding this contextual layer to factories, where they can start making use of AI to create different outcomes, or just to protect the knowledge, because we also know there's a migration of workforce, or people retire. So John, who was on line 2 for the last 30 years, well, John's decided to retire. That knowledge disappears through the door. With the knowledge base that has been harvested in the factory, merged with this layer and added the layer of intelligence, you're able to then make these recommendations that what John would have done, but accelerated and so on. So for us, whether it is a use case around predictive maintenance, there's one of the great cases, and oldest, I would say, with IoT devices, sensors on production lines, but a lot of non-hard sensor data generated content is even more valuable than the IoT stuff. So yeah, at Solvus, we're launching a number of agents, and And I would say that the new range we're launching to customers called K, so a play on Kaizen and K AI, is about harvesting that data and bringing it in a context that's relevant to operators, supervisors, and frontline workers in factories.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Fred, for sharing your viewpoints on this topic. And well, let's close with Fran. Fran, would you like to add some insights from your research and from your analysis in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we saw back in 2024, in early 2024, was AI sort of acting as a differentiator for many of the augmented connected worker platforms. I think now, 2 years later, is present across most vendors, and I think the evolution that has now occurred is it's gone from general applications of AI to addressing very specific use cases, which provide very specialized tools. We can really provide value, which is, I think, the most important part of AI, being more than a buzzword, and providing real value to manufacturers. So, as you know, the different panelists mentioned in their answers, there are more and more use cases. For example, for predictive maintenance, you can also have unique insights coming from AI. You can also have error detection alongside the work execution, for example, and it can really help with predictive upskilling. So I think really, as the time progresses, and I'm really looking forward to how the market looks in 2 years from now, for example, I think we will see AI really being used to enable capabilities that we previously didn't think would be possible.
And probably use cases or capabilities that today are not even, developed, right? So it's evolving so fast, this field, that it surprises us day after day. So thank you all for sharing your insights on this very, very, very relevant topic, not just for the ACW landscape or sector, but also for the entire industrial automation and software space, right? So we talked about a lot about AI, right? But there is another technology that is getting or has been getting consistent attention in ACW discussions, and that technology is augmented reality, right? So the question, and with these questions, we are closing this section on ACW platform development, and I would like Fred to start, sharing his insights on what role could augmented reality AR play in the future of manufacturing, and what are the main barriers, do you think, which do you think are the main barriers to a wider adoption?
Yeah, good point, good question. So we've been working on augmented reality for a couple of years, actually. And some of the key applications around onboarding staff, so training on site, having access through goggles to information based on where you are, geocoding in the factory, geolocation-based information is key. And that means that you're saving time. You're ensuring a consistent approach to onboarding. You're ensuring a consistent approach to training your people and making sure they can also use that technology to record, right, information. So there's a lot of contextual, again, data in the factory, which you make available to the frontline worker. So it's around time, safety elements. You've got all of those plays, and we have applications in each of the different modules around AR. But let's not forget that AR is a delivery mechanism, right? And so there are several barriers. One is obviously cost of the technology. I mean, it's expensive. Are you going to kit all of your frontline workers with special goggles or whatever? Or tablets, etc. So whatever, we know that the cost of all of these items are coming down, which is great. But is it at a point where factories can afford to do that? That's the question. But overall, there's also, factories are a harsh environment. So you also have some technology issues around their use, around communications, connectivity, and so on. But you also have the other point, which is AR without data and intelligence is nothing. And so while you may want to launch an AR solution into your factory, what is important is that you've already started harvesting the intelligence that you want to have surface to workers. And that's kind of what we've been busy doing, is not only enabling the mechanism of how do you make that visible to your frontline workers, but also how do you harvest the data and make that relevant at a particular point in time.
Thank you very much, Fred. Jerry, would you mind sharing your thoughts on this topic, please?
Yeah, I mean, to be blunt on it, I don't see it as a full-fledged practical use across manufacturing, right? I look at, with over 500 customers, over 1 million people using our solutions, hundreds of thousands of locations there. And if I poll my customers, the majority are going to say, yeah, we have one or two, right? And part of it is the cost. I look at it as there may be, especially in the maintenance operations and complex, that there's a way for it. We take it as a view is we're AR ready, meaning it's a modal, and the customer decides what modal they want to use, and that modal may be it could be a laptop, it could be some type of handheld device, it could be embedded. Meaning we'll embed in Aptiv's user interface, right? If you have easy access to information. If that means then that's AR use, we're ready for that, because the complexity and the cost, right, of making it, and I think it's geared towards probably certain types of environments, right? Probably highly geared towards a large process manufacturer with very, very complex equipment that you can easily access. But I think for a discrete and assembly operations, I don't see it today.
That's interesting observation. Thank you, Jerry and Sandeep. Your views on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I fully align with Fred and Jerry, right? I think look, AR has a strong potential, like on the surface, for training, remote assistance, and I think Jerry is absolutely right. It's not for every single industry or every single company. It depends on complex maintenance tasks or the kind of procedures they have to do in hazardous environment. It could be in the mining environment where they put their life at risk to go on an underground mine to go execute something. But there are real barriers. There's hardware friction. There's adoption challenges. I think Fred highlighted, right? You're not going to have everyone wear goggles and roam around, or and I think even Jerry highlighted, right? Like, we actually have customers that actually all have some form of AR, but they max have like maybe 2 or like 10 devices that's sitting in their digital innovation lab, showcasing to people what the art of the possible is, because the ROI is unclear. Your business execs are not going to sign on a check till they understand how it's going to pay back on your P&L, right? And what we are seeing is customers are continuing to prioritize execution discipline and operational consistency first, right? And the data that comes along with it, as Fred highlighted, right? Because the data is going to be the power in terms of how you can augment the frontline worker to execute work better, or even train them better in the future. Maybe it's AR becomes mainstream, but you still need to get your basics right. What we see is when we go to these clients, the maturity of these clients, some of them don't even have basic processes set up, right? We're talking about introducing AR, VR to those plants, right? So it's a maturity journey that the sites have to go through, right? Each site is different. Some companies are very, tech savvy, forward looking. All of their sites may be like really advanced, and they're looking at the next frontier to create value. But the reality is in industrials right now, in manufacturing, the maturity of technology adoption on the front line is extremely low. We are even like probably scratching the surface on using a mobile or a tablet across enterprises. And if you see, most enterprises are still, or many of them are still on paper for many of their processes and spreadsheets. So I think AR will be important someday, but today's biggest unlock is improving how work gets executed daily. Execution excellence is the foundation. AR will build on top of that in the future.
Interesting observation. Thank you, Sandeep, for sharing your thoughts. And Fran, would you like to add insights and analysis from your research on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do agree. I think AR would really signify a new way for workers to interact with their environment, adding a layer over the physical world and enabling some really interesting capabilities, since it would mean hands-free work on the shop floor. It could, allow more flexibility and improve the delivery of digital work instructions. For example, provide critical information on assets for maintenance crews, as well as facilitate remote guidance from experts, for example. However, I do agree that currently it's very limited in scope in many regards. I think the biggest limiting factor is probably the hardware, so specific augmented reality hardware. I think currently it doesn't quite fit their requirements, both in terms of, in some cases, safety, and in some cases, actually being easy for the workforce to engage with and adopt, as well as, of course, the steep price that many times comes associated with it. However, what we have seen is there are growing use cases for augmented reality that are currently being addressed via mobile devices. So we really think there is a possibility in the future that these growing use cases being addressed by mobile devices can generate both the requirements for new AR hardware to emerge, as well as create a new possible audience or market for AR technology. So I think definitely right now isn't very widespread across manufacturers, but probably in the mid to long term, it could really become an additional layer in the shop floor and could really improve some processes and some operations.
Thank you, Fran, and again, thank you all very much. And with this, we close the second section of this discussion today, the ACW development scope, deployment scope, right? Let's now look at where these platforms sit in the broader industrial technology landscape, right? And what that means for vendors and buyers alike. So let's start discussing the last section for this session, which is the ACW competitive landscape. So we have 3 questions here also to address. Let's start with the first one, which says, do ACW platform actually overlap with systems like MES, LMS, CMMS, and others? And is there a sort of competition with these systems, ACW versus all these systems? So I'd like here to Fran to start the discussion based on his research.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is a very interesting question because, as we have talked, throughout this webinar, definitely these platforms have capabilities that would typically be associated with some of the systems that Sebastian has mentioned in the question. And I think for some smaller companies, an argument could be made that, augmented connected worker platforms could replace these systems at a lower price point and sort of acting as an initial stepping stone for many of the smaller manufacturers. And moreover, we have heard of some cases where augmented connected worker platforms have gone up against these systems in different sales processes. However, I really think that augmented connected worker platforms um, can carve out their own place in the industrial landscape. Acting, there's a very widely used concept, which is the single pane of glass. And these platforms can really act as that layer or that unique source through which workers can interact with MES, LMS, CMMS, ERP, etc. These augmented connected worker platforms can really become sort of or relay vital information to the front-end workforce and data to ensure that operations are going smoothly. So yeah.
Thank you, Fran. So Fred, would you mind sharing your thoughts on this topic? The overlapping between the ACW platforms and other systems.
Sure. I think Juan described that perfectly. I think that there could be seen as a potential for competition, but I think overall, connected worker platforms or augmented worker platforms sit in a layer where there is a gap, and that's the gap that it was meant to fill. The intelligence layer between systems, what the systems record, and what I would say the people on the floor decide to do about it. And that is basically, in my opinion, where that sits nicely. So it sits between the documentation and that generation of data, and then giving that intelligence data back to the user to make a decision based again on the context in which they find themselves.
Yeah, perfect. I agree, Fred, completely. Sandeep, your thoughts on this topic, please?
Yeah, it's a very important question you've asked, because the buyers are confused, right? Because there's so many software categories and so much to choose from, and they are trying to figure out like what's best for their business. To simplify this for the entire buying community, right? And also, you guys can see if there's relevance to your research. I truly believe there are three layers that customers should be thinking about. The number one is your system of record, right? These are the SAPs of the world, your CMMSs of the world, your EHS systems of the world. I mean, ACW platforms are not here to replace those system of records. They've been built over decades, and they actually run core business transactions. But they are still a system of record, very important, right? It's still a system of record. Yes, we are hearing from ERP vendors and all of the players that we are building an AI layer on top. There's a business AI coming. You can actually use insights coming out of that data. But the reality is there is a whole new segment called system of insights, which their entire living for the last 2 decades has been on creating insights, which is the asset performance management players. MES is more focused on the production side. You have asset condition monitoring and process optimization capability players. So these are your system of insights. And I think lastly, which is the augmented connected worker space, I believe falls into this category called the system of execution or system of action. And this is a white space between a system of record and a system of insight. And you don't close that gap, you leave value on the table. So the challenge is, not data, and if what happens after the data tells you something, because if an MES detects a deviation, CMMS manages that work order, but neither is ensuring execution happens effectively. Neither of them, the system of record nor the system of insight, is ensuring that the execution happens effectively. That is where ACW platforms connect insights to execution. So it's complementing the landscape, and it's unlocking value that's left on the table.
Thank you, Sandeep. Yeah, very clear. And Jerry, to close this question, would you mind sharing your insights, please?
Yeah, look, I don't know if I have much more, as I agree 100% with Sandeep has said. The only thing I would add on to that, it's CMS systems. I used to run one. I used to own a CMS company, and their CMS, LMS, MES was built in the mind of the back office to solve for this record locker with, I need for either compliance reasons, to understand if work is getting done. They weren't built to facilitate work and execution in the line of work. And that's the missing gap that we're all trying to provide for. Will they come together, right? And I think as Fran said, if I'm a mid-sized small manufacturer, arguably any of us could help them, and they wouldn't need an MES for work execution, shop floor data, and traceability. But when you get to large manufacturing, it's much bigger than that. It's more complex. There's a lot of, and MES is still going to have a role, and a very important role. But I think the role that we're providing is this front end, as Sandeep said, is to make sure not only execution is getting done, that it's getting done right the first time.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely agree. Thank you all again for your insights. And now let's go to another question on this topic of the ACW landscape, augmented connected worker landscape, which is, I think it's one of the most practical questions of the session, right? So given all this overlap and these concepts and insights that we were discussing, how do you vendors communicate your value proposition clearly to the people making the buying decisions? What are the communication strategies that work best, right? And again, considering this perception in the market that an ACW platform may overlap with all these systems of records, as Sandeep mentioned, right? And I would like Fred to start on this one, if you may.
Yeah, sorry, I was just unmuting myself. Yeah, I'd say the vendors who communicate most effectively in this market are the ones who have stopped talking about their product entirely and start talking exclusively about their customers' performance, not about here is what our platform does, but here is what your line looks like after 6 months after deployment, etc. So it's around return on investment. It's around that message to the customer about what you bring to them and why they should use your platform for. Because as we just said, there's a lot of players in the market. There's a lot of different takes on the application. And when you're a customer needing to make a buy decision, you need to see what that differentiation is and what the use case is and what the return is on that investment. And I think that communication, certainly from our point of view, it's not just about making it clear at the point of sale. It's also during the time they use your platform, because any customer using a product day in, day out need to see real time, what is that return? Why did I make that decision? And was it the right one? You know, we used to say nobody got fired for buying IBM. And it's kind of some companies will need to make sometimes that case of not buying IBM. And when they do, they need to make sure it's a vindicated decision. So, you know, it's about making sure that you're clearly articulating what that proposition is for the customer, you know, what is, and that they can verify the arguments that you're putting forward in terms of making them justify that decision.
Thank you, Fred. And Sandeep, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I already touched
on the messaging.
Yeah, I already touched on that, Sebastian. I mean, like, we are a value-obsessed company internally. We call it internally a value 360 methodology. I mean, the entire company revolves around the customer's value, right? So for us, we take it very seriously. It's not a marketing gimmick. We actually, you know, advertise what we say we will do, and we hold ourselves accountable to that performance and that outcome, right? So I think I shared the Indorama story, a great public reference customer, 50 million margin expansion. We have other customers similarly, we have shared in other forums about their margin expansion. So for us, we actually start every conversation with an economic value hypothesis, actually. Every customer we connect with, we don't even talk about specific problems or areas that a feature can solve for you. We start with the conversation about where is your business, where does it need to go, why would you need to spend an additional dollar, one additional dollar, right? And it comes down to the customer at the highest levels is trying to optimize either, you know, their cash flow, or they're trying to improve their balance sheet, or they're trying to, you know, reduce their cost of goods sold or improve their throughput, OE. If we can understand that and we can then showcase a solution, one or more, like I said, sometimes in some cases we are doing it with an ecosystem. Sometimes we go with Seek as an example, or Augury along with Innovaptive and Dozuki as an example, to actually, you know, drive that economic value hypothesis for the customer. So for us, the value proposition is less. I think Fred is right? We stop talking about our product. We got to feel the customer in terms of where they are in their financials, work backwards from that on what's the right solution, one or more. In some cases, we tell the customer we may not even be the right solution because they're looking for just basic needs like a feature, and you have better solutions out there for just solving a feature problem, right? So our go-to-market is all about some way we contribute to margin expansion for our customer. That could be either through throughput, OE, or it could be through cost reduction, labor reduction, as well as parts optimization, working capital optimization.
Very interesting, Sandeep. Thank you. Thank you for your insights. And Jerry, would you mind to add your thoughts on how you communicate your value proposition?
From Fred and Sandeep, not a lot more to add, right? I mean, same philosophy. We're focused on outcomes. I mean, as an example, when someone comes to us, we we do not demo the product. We do not talk about feature functionality. We talk about what's your pain, what are you trying to accomplish, where do you think you are, and what your goals are. And then we kind of design what's the right solution. Can we handle that all ourselves, or do we need to bring partners in? Because at the end of the day, right, no one wants another piece of software that's sitting on the shelf not providing value, right? And I think any company now is much more educated from IT to the business. You're not gonna sell software unless you have an ROI that the executives are willing to put their name on, that I'm willing to buy this because this is the return and this is how it's important to the priorities of our business.
No, I agree 100%. Very interesting, Jerry, your insights here. And Fran, would you like to add to Sandeep's, Jerry, and Fred points?
Yeah, sure. No, I absolutely agree with all of them that, communications should be focused on, how these augmented connected worker platforms provide key improvements to manufacturers, messaging around return on investment, profits, and, the different metrics that they can improve. And I think it's really important because back when we did our initial research on the market in 2024, one of the main challenges, for vendors was communicating their value proposition for customers. And I think that really has changed both because of this messaging that vendors are now leveraging, as well as I think these platforms have become more well known in the manufacturing landscape, and especially, for example, among large enterprises that are further along their digitization path. So they do know the value that these platforms can provide. But I don't have much more to add. I think it's really important to communicate the value these platforms provide and not get sort of tied up in the technical aspects of it in many cases.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you so much. And well, this closes the main body of the discussion, right? The three key sections, the industrial challenges, the ACW platform development, and the ACW competitive landscape, right? So now getting into the Q&A section of the webinar, we have one question from one of the attendees from the audience, which says, operational excellence programs have existed long before ACW platforms. What does an ACW platform add to a program that's already running? Who would like to take this one?
I'm happy to start.
Sure, Fred.
That's an excellent question. So OPEX programs have indeed existed for decades, and the best ones have delivered real results without any of the technology that we've seen today. So what does a connected worker platform actually add? And I would say three things that the methodology alone cannot solve. First, consistency at scale. As we spoke about earlier, a great OPEX program in one plant run by a brilliant team still depends on those people being present every day. A platform embeds that methodology into the system so that it runs even when the best people are not in the room. Secondly, I would say knowledge retention. So when your most experienced operator, as we know, whether they retire, they're not there, etc., the methodology stays, which means you're always going to have available that data, that knowledge. Their judgment, their pattern recognition, all of those points, their ability to diagnose a deviation before it becomes a failure, that leaves with them. So a platform captures that expertise, keeps it working, and then thirdly, the feedback loop. Traditional OPEX generates insight through structured reviews, audits. A platform generates it continuously in real time. So from every action taken on the line. So that changes the speed at which improvement compounds, and the program sets the direction. The platform is there to make it stick. That's why I would say you need an OPEX platform.
Thank you very much, Fred. And well, I don't know if Sandeep, Jerry, or Fran would like to add something to Fred's thoughts on this question.
I'll keep it short, but I know we're end of
Sure.
the time here, right? I think it's a very straightforward answer in my opinion, right? Operational excellence programs have existed for decades. Total productive maintenance programs have been existing for decades. Yet industrial productivity is on a decline across all industries, right? The reality is, we do a lot of things to actually drive the cultural change, but they don't sustain in the long term. The reason it doesn't sustain in the long term is because if you don't have visibility and transparency of what you're doing each day, that you can actually change behaviors and sustain that behavioral change, it dies down eventually with the change in workforce, right? So operational excellence programs to sustain visibility, transparency, and weekly rhythms and monthly rhythms requires visibility and transparency of how execution is getting done. Without that, you cannot sustain an operational excellence program at all, right? So it is a lot of people being thrown at it to solve for that, but there's a better way now with ACW.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sandeep. And Jerry, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add on that. It's like we don't use the word program. Program means it's a one-time effect, right? And I look at this as what the platform does is it weaves it into the culture and your entire environment. And once you weave it in, and once you weave something into that, it creates a flywheel effect. And a flywheel effect is always striving for continuous improvement, safety, quality, and efficiency. And a program to me is a one-off, and this is where a sustaining platform weaves it into your fabric of your company.
Great clarification. Thanks, Jerry, for that. And we are on time. So first of all, I want to thank our panelists personally, Sandeep, Fred, Jerry, and Fran. Thank you for your time and for this thoughtful conversation we had today. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. It was a pleasure to moderate this session. Thank you. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the day and see you next time. Thank you very much.